Have you ever walked into a place that should feel like home, but instead, every step feels like walking back into your own humiliation? My name's Logan Price, 35 years old. I'm standing outside the towering steel gates of my uncle's estate in Wilmington, North Carolina, rubbing the inside lining of my old denim jackets, something I've held onto since the days I slept in my truck. The early June air cuts through the pine trees, rich with that sweet, earthy scent that always takes me back to better days. Before everything broke, behind me, my beat-up 2004 Chevy Silverado rests awkwardly in a long, gleaming line of Range Rovers, Porsches, and a brand new Rivian I'd bet belongs to my cousin Carter. The Price Family Summit is minutes from starting some tradition cooked up decades ago to keep appearances tight and bragging rights tighter. Standing here, I feel it again. That same weight I've carried since I was 19. I'm a Price by blood, but somehow, I've always felt like the footnote. The estate in front of me, South Haven, is a monument to our family's rise in the textile industry. Every inch of it screams wealth: the marble pillars, the sweeping balconies, the stained glass sunroom I used to sneak into as a kid. But it doesn't feel like legacy anymore. It feels like a trophy case. A place where success is measured in stock options and vacation homes, not character, not grit. And I've got something in my hand that could change all of that. I glance at the black leather briefcase I'm clutching, brand new, painfully out of place against my faded button-down, worn jeans, and boots that have seen 5 states and 2 failed ventures. Inside that case is proof. Tax records, contracts, real numbers, the kind that show I didn't just survive, I built something. Alone. For 3 years, I kept it quiet. For 3 years, I worked, slept in motels, $8 tacos, and rebuilt my small logistics company from the wreckage. My own father once laughed at that this moment. This is my war drum. Then, like always, comes the voice. The one that grates the nerves before I even see him. Well, Logan actually showed. Someone calls from the grand staircase. It's Carter, my older cousin, crisp navy suit, designer watch, champagne glass in hand. Here's what you'd get if you ordered confidence off Amazon, and it showed up as arrogance. That thing, outside yours. Can't believe it still runs, he chuckles, raising an eyebrow. Didn't think they let rust buckets park here. I forced a grin. Still runs better than your crypto portfolio, I say lightly, walking through the gate. I could have said more about how that truck hauled my first 100 shipments when I was down to gas money and prayers. But I bite it back. I'm not here for banter. Ever had a moment like that? When you swallow the comeback, not because you're weak but because you're saving your voice for something bigger. Let me know in the comments, because trust me, I've been there more times than I can count. Stepping into South Haven feels like entering a showroom. Polished wood floors, the scent of imported cologne clinging to tailored suits and dresses too tight for comfort. Everything here is curated. Perfect. Fake. And just ahead, I spot Uncle Raymond, the Empire's keeper, my dad's older brother. He built most of this on sweat, deals, and let's be honest, brute force. I used to admire him. Now, I just want him to see me. Not the scroop, not the dropout. Me. As the room quiets and everyone takes their seats, I feel my pulse climb. The briefcase sits on my lap like a secret weapon. I'm not here to brag. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to rewrite the story. Have you ever walked into a room full of people who share your blood, and still felt completely alone? That's how it's always been for me at the annual Prescott Family Summit. Technically, it's a reunion. But not the kind with warm hugs and potato salad. No, this one is tailored suits, strategic smiles, and champagne toasts over stock projections. My grandfather, Robert Prescott, started it in the 80s. He wanted it to be a chance for our family to lift each other up, share ideas, build a legacy, look out for one another. But when he died in 2006, everything shifted. My dad, Gerald Prescott, took over the reins, and under him, this gathering became something else entirely. A performance. A financial battleground. Here, your worth isn't in your kindness or wisdom, it's in your net assets. I step into the sprawling estate's parlor, greeted by marble floors and a chandelier so big it could light a small town. Around me, everyone sparkles, both literally and figuratively. My cousin Megan flaunts her new body sculpting clinic in Beverly Hills, wearing 6-inch heels and enough gold to blind someone. Across the room, Uncle Travis, fresh from his third real estate acquisition in Miami, holds court about his upcoming TED Talk. And then there's my father, right where I expected him, seated at the head of the 12-foot table, eyes buried in a thick folder, probably someone's quarterly earnings statement. He doesn't glance up, he doesn't need to. The room bends around him like gravity. Gerald Prescott holds 42% of the voting rights, because here, decisions are made based on declared financial influence, and me, a measly 3%, just enough to show up, not enough to speak. Logan, sit, he mutters without lifting his head. Wearing that shirt again? Haven't I told you if you want to be taken seriously, dress like a Prescott? There's a pause. In the room, not a long one, just enough for eyes to turn. One, catch a few snickers. My cousin Ryan raises an eyebrow like I've just spilled sauce on the rug. I pull out a chair slowly, gripping the handle of my old brown briefcase, the one I've kept since grad school, and rested in my lap. I gently rub the worn leather, like it's some kind of anchor. I think the shirt's fine, Dad, I say quietly, but without flinching. It's comfortable. His laugh is short, derisive. Comfort won't buy you credibility in this room, Logan. You know the rules. Then he raps the table twice, like a judge calling court into session. Let's get to it. We're discussing the offer to sell this property. Sterling Group wants to turn it into a boutique resort. The deal's clean. Numbers are strong. My gut tightens. This house. It's more than beams and bricks to me. It's where Grandpa Robert taught me to fish. Where I used to sneak out onto the roof with a flashlight and read long after bedtime. Where my mum, back before she got sick, used to sing to me under the big elm tree out back its home. But here, to this room, it's just a line item. What would you do in that moment when your entire past is reduced to a dollar amount? Comment below. Would you speak up, even if your voice held no weight? I glance around, eyes dart between me, the paperwork, and the gleaming windows that overlook the estate's private lake. Nobody else is going to fight this, but maybe I will. Have you ever been in a room full of people who once dismissed you only to realize they have no idea you're the one holding all the cards now? That's exactly where I was. Sitting at the long oak table my grandfather carved by hand. In the mansion he built brick by brick with the calloused strength of a dreamer. The same mansion where I once chased fireflies barefoot and listened to Grandpa tell stories of building his first lumber mill with nothing but a broken saw and pure will. Now, they wanted to sell it. Not because we needed the money, no, because, to them, it was just another asset on a spreadsheet. I wanted to say something. I did, but with just 3% voting power in the family trust, my words would have less weight than the silence between them. Logan, are you really sure about this? That voice got calm, measured, but firm. It came from the end of the table. Martin, my father's youngest brother. The only one who ever had the guts to speak against my father's decisions. He wasn't flashy like the rest of them. Just a crisp button-up, sleeves rolled up, grey streaks in his hair, and that same warm glint in his eyes that made you believe, just for a moment, that maybe someone still had a heart in this room. This house. It's where Dad's soul still lives. Martin said quietly. Do you really think he'd want it turned into cash? My father didn't even blink. Don't romanticize it, Martin. This is a high-leverage liquidity event. We'll reinvest the gains. Sentiment doesn't scale. Cold, efficient. My father had always been that way, and the worst part, no one had enough power to stop him. Not even Martin, with his 9%. Martin fell silent, his jaw tightening. I caught his eye. He gave me the smallest nod. He didn't know what I carried in the briefcase under the table. But I think he sensed I was no longer the quiet one with nothing to offer. They still saw me as the black sheep. the dropout from the lumber legacy, the one who left to study biochemistry, then founded a weird little food company focused on lab-grown protein. They laughed then. And still, they talked over me now. Madeline, my cousin, chimed in. Just closed on a stake in a crypto accelerator in San Jose. Tripled my money in 6 months. Liam, as always, followed with, finally closed on that duplex in Miami. Ocean views, rooftop pool, pure alpha. Everything they said felt like tiny darts aimed at who I used to be. Their smiles were sharp. Their approval always came with a condition. Be like them. Drew, are you still running that? ... What is it? That food company thing? Madeline asked, syrupy sweet but soaked in smugness. I just nodded, still going. Inside, I smiled. Because in 2 days, during the final vote, they'd learned that I now held a 40% share. That my startup Once a Family Punchline had just closed a Series D round at a $270 million valuation. That I, Drew Harris, had amassed $95 million in assets. More than all of them combined. And that I would not let them sell this house. That night, I sat on the same creaky bed I'd slept in as a boy. The garden outside hummed with summer insects. The briefcase was beside me, locked, glowing in my mind like a torch waiting to be lit. I thought of Mum, always encouraging me with soft words and unwavering belief, even when the family mocked me. I thought of Grandpa, how he used to say, "A house isn't just wood and nails. It's proof you were here. That you built something real." They thought I was still the failure. Let them, because when I speak next, I won't be asking for a seat at the table, I'll be flipping the whole damn table over. And if you were me, what would you do at that final meeting? Would you reveal everything? Or hold just enough back to make them sweat? Let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt the storm building inside you? Not from hate, but from truth that's been buried too long? That was me. I sat there in silence, fists clenched under the table, as the rest of the house remained wrapped in its silk-covered illusions. In 2 days, everything would shift. And when it did, they'd finally see who I really was. Not the quiet one. Not the forgotten one, but the man they underestimated. I opened my eyes to the soft glow of dawn pushing through the linen curtains of the guest room in the Hartwell estate. The faint chirping of robins outside made something stir deep inside me. It pulled me back to a simpler time when I was just a barefoot kid racing across the grass with a toy airplane made from balsa wood, laughing beside my granddad, Henry. Back then, this house meant love. It meant safety. It meant family. But that version of home had long since been paved over by entitlement and false smiles. I swung my legs off the bed, reached for the worn leather shoes I hadn't worn in years, and let my eyes rest on the dark, brown briefcase across the table. Inside it, the truth. The kind of truth that doesn't just speak, it shakes foundations. As I moved down the grand staircase, each creaking step echoed like a warning bell. The Hartwells used to be known for their hands-on grit and blue-collar roots. Now, they flaunted penthouse stocks and charity galas like war medals. But I knew better. I lived inside their story, yes, but I was also the only one who never forgot the beginning. Before the suits, before the private jets, there was my grandfather, Henry Hartwell. And he was the soul they've erased from the portrait wall. The kitchen smelled like burnt toast and fresh coffee. A grounding reminder that at least something in this house remained real. Uncle Joe sat at the end of the table, glasses perched, low on his nose, flipping through a folded newspaper. Just us two, same as always. Everyone else preferred their avocado toast, served on china. Somewhere where the mirrors reflected only their best angles. Joe looked up and smiled faintly. His eyes asked more than his mouth ever did. "You all right, Ben?" I gave a small nod, grabbed a corner of toast, and chewed it mechanically. My body was here, but my mind, it had wandered back to stories I'd heard 100 times, but never stopped. Needing to hear, my grandfather Henry was born in 1924, in a rickety farmhouse just outside Red Bluff, Alabama. Dirt floors, cornbread dinners. His father worked the land until his knuckles bled. and his mother sang hymns louder than the storm when the roof leaked. Henry was 18 when he joined the war. He came back scarred physically, emotionally, but with fire in his chest. Not rage, purpose. He once told me, voice low and steady, "They laughed at me, Ben. Said I'd never build something real. Said a farm boy from nowhere couldn't compete with the city men in Birmingham. But I didn't want to prove them wrong for glory. I wanted to build something they couldn't ignore." Those words never left me, ever. And now, sitting across from Joe, the toast suddenly felt like paper in my mouth. Because I knew that the house we sat in, this empire, was built on that fire. On grit, on scars, and somewhere along the way, that legacy had been hijacked by the greedy, the false-hearted, and the polished. You ever look at your own blood and realize they're the very people your hero warned you about? I did, every day. I wanted to ask you this. Do you think truth matters when no one else in the room wants to hear it? Because I've carried Henry's words like a shield. And in 2 days, I'm standing in front of this family, not as the forgotten grandson, but as the man holding every document, every signature, every hidden transaction they thought I'd never find. But before that happens, I need to ask you something. If you had the chance to expose the lie that rewrote your family's history, would you do it? Even if it meant tearing down everything they built? Comment below. I want to hear from you. Would you stay quiet, or would you burn it all for the truth? Because I've already lit the match. Have you ever looked back at something your family built and wondered if you could keep it alive without losing yourself along the way? I think about that a lot. Especially now that I'm older, sitting on this porch with the Georgia sun warming the boards beneath my boots. My grandpa, Walter Carter, built something big. Not just a company, but a way of life. He didn't set out to make millions. He started with a tiny sawmill in the woods outside Macon, doing it to leave something behind for his kids and grandkids. But Grandpa had vision. He wasn't content with just cutting and selling lumber. He wanted to create, innovate. That's how he came up with flame-resistant plywood and pressure-treated timber that didn't rot in our thick southern air by the mid-1950s. Carter Timber wasn't just a family name, it was stamped on every third building in the South. Grandpa kept pushing. He bought up land to lock in his own timber supply. He opened modern factories. And by the time I came along in 1990, the Carter family was sitting on an empire, our home. A sprawling estate near Augusta, designed by Grandpa himself, every plank of wood hand-picked like a legacy in itself, but none of that the money. The plants, the empire, was what made Grandpa my hero. No, it was how he carried it. Always in a flannel shirt, same beat-up Ford pickup, hands full of calluses and heart full of patience. I spent hours with him out back in the woodworking shed, hammering together tables too crooked to sell. He never minded. Money's a tool. Will, he told me once, setting a nail with one clean hit. You use it to build a house, feed your folks, but if it becomes who you are, you've already lost. That line, it stayed with me, still does. What about you? Has anyone ever told you something so simple, yet it's stuck in your bones like truth? Grandpa believed real wealth was family. Not just bloodlines, but the way we showed up for each other. That belief is what led to the Carter family gathering. It started back in 1980. Grandpa saw how fast the company was growing and how quickly his children were drifting in different directions. My dad, Charles, the oldest, was handling the main business. Aunt Lillian moved to Charleston and made a name for herself in design. Uncle Ray opened up a boutique hotel chain across the coast. And Uncle Joe, the youngest, stuck closer to home. Building bridges literally, as a civil engineer in Athens, Grandpa feared success would tear us apart. So he created the Carter family gathering. Not a stiff business meeting, but a yearly retreat. No suits, no spreadsheets, just stories, ribs on the grill, and sitting in a circle sharing wins and losses. I still remember being 7, curled up, next to Grandpa's boots, hearing laughter rise with the smoke from Grandma's pecan pie. Back then, it wasn't about shares or votes. It was about Uncle Ray opening up after nearly losing everything on a bad hotel deal. About Aunt Lillian, needing help securing capital for her design firm. It was real, messy, human. Do you have traditions like that in your family? Moments where everyone drops the pretense and just connects. Those early gatherings grounded me, taught me that empires don't last because of money, they last because someone cares enough to keep the ties strong. And that someone, at least back then, was Grandpa. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think legacy is built in boardrooms or in backyards with people who love you enough to tell the truth? Let me know in the comments. What's the one piece of wisdom from your elders that changed you? Have you ever watched something you love slowly change into something unrecognizable and felt completely powerless to stop it? When I was younger, my grandfather was everything to me. He was steady, kind, and real, the kind of man who believed in people, not titles. Every summer, our extended family would gather on his ranch in Montana. My aunt would bring her sketchbooks, hoping to open a small design studio someday. Grandpa always made time to listen. Sometimes he'd give advice. Sometimes he'd quietly help with a connection or cover a loan no one could repay. "We're a family," he'd say, voice strong and certain. "If one of us falls, we all rise to lift them." I lived for those summers. For the way Grandpa looked at everyone like we all mattered. He'd call me out to the backyard, point to the old oak trees he planted when my dad was a boy, and say, "One day, Ryan, you'll carry these roots forward. You'll remember what they stand for." Believed him with all my heart. But in 2005, everything changed. I had just turned 15 when Grandpa died of a heart attack, and with him gone, the soul of our family didn't just flicker, it began to vanish. But after that, my dad, Martin Caldwell, stepped in to lead the annual family meeting. As the eldest, he inherited both the authority and the pressure to carry on Grandpa's vision. But Dad saw things differently. He always had. Where Grandpa saw character, Dad saw balance sheets. Where Grandpa saw resilience, Dad saw market value. My father runs Caldwell Timber, a company my grandfather founded with nothing but grit and a pickup truck. Under Dad, it became an empire. Multinational, efficient, dominant. But in building that empire, he built a wall between us, between values, between what we once were and what we'd become. I'll never forget the first family conference after Grandpa passed. It was 2006. I was 16 and still grieving, but also excited. Naively, I thought we'd sit around the long wooden table again, share stories, trade hugs, feel like cousins instead of coworkers. Instead, I walked into a boardroom. Dad stood at the head of the table with a thick black ledger and a cold expression. "From now on," he said, "voting rights in this family will reflect financial contribution. Those who give the most should have the strongest voice." At first, I didn't get it. It just sounded off. Then I looked around. Everyone's faces had changed. My mum, who never raised her voice in a room, squeezed my hand under the table. Her knuckles were pale, her eyes wide with worry. From that moment on, the atmosphere shifted. The warm conversations turned into presentations. People pulled out spreadsheets and investment reports. Cousins compared rental properties. Uncles bragged about international stocks. My dad controlled 40% of the vote. My Uncle Sam, a real estate developer in Miami, held 15%. Suddenly, they were the stars of the show. People like my mum, who raised 3 kids while supporting our dreams, or my Uncle Carl, a high school art teacher who lived modestly, were barely acknowledged. They sat at the edge of the room like shadows, forgotten. And me, I was just a teenager. No job, no assets, no stake. Dad gave me 1% of the voter number that looked like a joke in black ink. I felt invisible. Comment below. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't matter in your own family? I'd love to hear how you handled it. What broke my heart most wasn't just the numbers or the silence. It was watching something sacred, something Grandpa had spent his life nurturing, become a cold business transaction. Do you think families should measure value in money? Because I don't. And in that room, surrounded by polished shoes and paper-thin smiles, I started to realize Maybe I was the only one still carrying Grandpa's roots. Or maybe, just maybe, they were still buried. They're waiting to grow again. Let me know what you think. Would you have spoken up? Or stayed quiet like I did? Have you ever wanted to speak up so badly that your whole body shook but you said nothing? Just sat there, swallowing fire while the people who were supposed to love you chipped away at your worth? That was me. For most of my life, growing up in the Carson family wasn't exactly easy. My dad, Marshall Carson, made sure everyone knew where they stood on, where I didn't. He never raised a hand, never shouted in public, but the words he chose cut cleaner than any knife. Ryan, if you keep spacing out like this, you'll never amount to anything. You think Grandpa Jack built this legacy by daydreaming? Those words still ring in my ears, cold, calculated, delivered over dinner like they were facts, not judgments. I wanted to scream that I wasn't drifting. I was building, planning, creating something with meaning, something bigger than what they saw, but I stayed quiet. Because back then, I had no proof. No trophies, no polished speeches. Just grit and hope. And apparently, that didn't count for much in the Carson household. Flash forward to now. I'm sitting in the old family room, clutching a chipped ceramic mug filled with lukewarm coffee. The bitterness isn't just from the roast, it's from everything this house reminds me of. Across from me, Uncle Tom folds his newspaper and studies me like he's searching for something. "What's on your mind, Ree?" he asks, voice soft. I force a half smile and shake my head. Just thinking about Grandpa Jack, wondering what he'd say if he saw how this conference turned out. Uncle Tom sighs, his eyes drifting toward the window. "He'd be heartbroken, son, but proud of you. You're more like him than you think, and that hits hard, because I remember the nights I locked myself in this room, crying after board meetings. After Jake, my golden boy, cousin, mocked every idea I brought to the table. After Sophia rolled her eyes like I was an embarrassment. After my father looked at me with that quiet contempt that said, 'You're not one of us.' My only comfort then was Mum. She'd sit beside me, rub my back, and whisper, 'You don't owe them proof. Just be who you are.' But I needed proof. I needed something they couldn't deny, so I built it in secret, in the corners of cheap cafes, late nights, weekends no one noticed. A sustainable food startup, something real, something that mattered. And now 7 years later, it's worth over $300 million. I haven't told them, not yet, because this isn't about the money. It never was. It's about the silence. The years of swallowing my voice, the way my dad dismissed me, the way Jake laughed at me, the way Sophia never saw me as more than the quiet cousin with weird ideas. It's about this house, Grandpa Jack's house, his pride, his legacy. They want to tear it down and turn it into condos. Build a shiny, soulless monument to their greed. I'm here to stop them, not just for Grandpa. For myself. But here's the thing, this isn't a revenge story. It's about reclaiming your voice, even when everyone told you it didn't matter. And the second day of the conference is about to begin. Dad's going to push hard for the vote. I can feel it. So now, I'm asking you, have you ever had to stand up to someone you once begged for approval? Ever sat in a room full of people who knew one version of you only, to quietly prepare to show them the real one? Drop a comment. Tell me your story. I'm not the only one who's been there, because sometimes, the loudest thing you can do, is finally speak. Have you ever walked into a room, knowing that no one expects anything from you and, worse, that some of them hope you'll fail? That's how I felt that morning, standing in the hallway just outside the conference room, my fingers wrapped tightly around a lukewarm coffee mug. My name is Caleb Morrison. And while I only own 3% of our family corporation, I've made a decision. I'm done sitting quietly. I've spoken to my lawyer. The paperwork is ready. And when the moment is right, they'll all hear the truth. I'm not here to fight for power. I'm here to protect something that matters more than profits. My grandfather's legacy. I took a deep breath and looked out the window toward the garden. The morning light spilled over the tops of the oak trees, the same ones Grandpa planted over 50 years ago. They've survived storms, time, and neglect, just like I have. I won't let you down, I whispered. That promise wasn't for anyone else. Just for him. Behind me, a hand landed gently on my shoulder. Ready for the storm, Caleb? Uncle Ron asked, his voice soft but steady. Ready might be pushing it, I muttered, taking a seat on the bench nearby. But I'll make it through. Same as always, he nodded, eyes filled with quiet concern. You're stronger than you think. Henry talks a big game, but he's not the whole damn boardroom. I wanted to believe that. I really did, but as soon as I walked into the meeting room, that resolve twisted into a knot in my chest. There it was, again, that feeling of being the outsider in my own family. Dad sat at the head of the table, dressed to intimidate in his sharp navy suit, fingers laced like a judge waiting to deliver a sentence. My older brother, Josh, lounged to his right, phone in hand, probably texting about his new penthouse or some hotshot deal in Miami. Across from me, my cousin Leah smirked the second I walked in, lips curled like she knew a joke I wasn't part of. Maybe I was the joke. The others were scattered around Uncle Greg, Aunt Diane, a few relatives I barely recognized from past Thanksgivings. No one met my eyes for long, just like always. I was tolerated, not respected. Take a seat, Caleb, my father said flatly, without looking up. We've got a lot to cover, and not a lot of time to waste. I sat down slowly, placing my briefcase across my lap like armor. My expression stayed still, but inside, everything tensed. I knew what today was about. I'd overheard Dad mention it yesterday while bragging to investors on the phone. They wanted to sell the estate. My grandfather's home, the last real piece of him we had left. They wanted to turn it into a luxury resort complete with a spa valet service, and probably a golf course named after someone else's legacy. I couldn't let that happen. My father tapped his pen on the table. That was always his way of commanding the room. No raised voice, just control in every gesture. Let's begin, he said. Today, we'll be discussing the estate. Specifically, its transformation into something more useful to the corporation. That word useful stung, like the house itself had somehow become a burden. Like Grandpa's values and life and vision were just items on a spreadsheet waiting to be deleted. As Dad launched into projections and site plans, I glanced around the table. Josh was nodding, probably already imagining the commission. Leah was flipping through glossy renderings like it was a catalog. No one even blinked. Not until I did. I'd like to say something, I said, standing up slowly. The room fell into an awkward, heavy silence. Dad looked up, irritated. Make it quick. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the envelope. My hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment meant. I have here legal documentation, I began, prepared in advance and shared with our attorney, regarding a clause in Grandpa's will. One that restricts the sale or commercial use of the estate unless approved by all primary shareholders. That got their attention. Josh looked up. Leah sat forward. And for the first time, my father didn't have something to say. I continued, voice steady now. I may only hold 3%, but I'm a primary shareholder, and I do not consent. If you've ever had a moment when every eye in the room is finally on you, not out of pity, not out of mockery, but because they have to listen, then you know the electricity that buzzed in my chest. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about winning. It was about standing for Grandpa. For myself, there's a reason they call it legacy. It's not a business term. It's a heartbeat that lives on. So now, I want to ask you, if someone tried to erase the most important part of your family's history, would you let them? Drop a comment and tell me, what would you do in my shoes? And if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, trust me, I see you. You're not alone. Have you ever stood in a room where everyone's clapping for something you know will destroy everything that matters? That's exactly where I was, sitting stiffly in a walnut leather chair, watching my cousin Levi flash his too white smile as he delivered what he thought was groundbreaking news. Brantford Development Group has offered $25 million for the estate, he said, voice practically echoing off the paneling. Plus equity in the spa resort they'll build on the land. It's time we modernize. Evolve Dad's legacy into something more profitable. Scattered applause. A few head nods. I felt my throat tighten. Levi was talking about selling the estate. Our estate. The house my grandfather built with his bare hands. The one where we buried time capsules in the backyard, where Christmases glowed by the stone fireplace, where my mum used to sing while baking pecan pie. And now, he wanted to bulldoze it for jacuzzis and imported marble. I wanted to scream, but I stayed quiet. Timing matters. And mine hadn't come yet. Across the table, Uncle Mike's knuckles turned white around his coffee cup. He cleared his throat. "Hold on," he said, voice low and gravelly. "This place isn't just some tract of land. This house is our spine. It's where we've gathered for 3 generations. You don't tear down your spine because it looks a little old-fashioned." My father leaned forward, shaking his head with a smirk. "Mike, you've always been a romantic," he said. "But this isn't a Hallmark movie. It's business. And you don't have the shares to block this anyway. You've got, what, 9%? Then came the laughter. Samantha Lever's sister tilted her head toward me. "Mike's not the only one stuck in the past," she said. "Isn't that right, Jonah?" She winked at me, smirking. "Still driving that ancient Ford truck? Wearing the same boots you wore in high school?" The room chuckled, and Levi clapped like it was all a stand-up routine. "Jonah, you seriously look like you walked straight out of a vintage western," he said. "Do you even own a smartphone?" I gripped my briefcase tighter under the table. "Steady, Jonah. They want a reaction. Don't give them one." "I live the way I believe is right," I said flatly, looking Levi dead in the eye. "Not everyone needs a Tesla to feel like a man." And just like that, the air changed. For a second, the room was quiet. No one laughed. Then, Levi chuckled. "Still bitter about being broke, huh? You should sell that sad little farm-tateable business of yours, and maybe buy a decent jacket. We'll chip in for a haircut." His words didn't just sting, they stripped. But I didn't bite. Not yet. I had something they didn't know. Tomorrow, when the shareholder meeting reconvenes, they'll find out the truth, they'll learn. That I've spent the last decade building something real. That my organic food company now controls $95 million in assets quietly, steadily enough to secure 40% of voting rights. So, go ahead and laugh today. But tomorrow, I'll be holding the gavel. Have you ever stood in a room full of people who share your blood, and still felt completely alone? That's what happened to me the day my voice cracked in front of my entire family and no one cared. It didn't start that way. It never does. We were sitting around the long mahogany table at the annual Beckett family business meeting. The air thick with tension and stale coffee. My father, Martin Beckett, had just slammed his palm on the table. After I spoke, "Enough, Josh. If you have nothing to contribute, stay quiet and listen. We're discussing serious matters." His voice was cold steel. I froze. It wasn't just the tone, it was the weight behind it. That sharp edge meant something, and it hit harder than any slap. But what stung more was the echo. That voice had cut me down before. My mind spun back 5 years, vivid, uninvited, just like trauma tends to do. It was 2020, and I was 33 years deep into building Greenrise, a sustainable farming tech startup. It was still early, scrappy, but growing. I was living lean, skipping vacations, pouring everything back into research and soil analytics. That year's conference was held at the Beckett family headquarters in Northern California. Their legacy, timber, old school, generational. Beckett, forest industries, but things were rough, volatile markets, rising material costs. My father, the company's chairman, presented what he called a turning point plan. It was bold, reckless, really. He wanted to take out a $75 million loan to build a lumber processing facility in Honduras. Cheap labor. Big margins, he said. But the political risk was off the charts. I'd done the math. I'd read the World Bank reports, trade forecasts, even satellite drought risk assessments, and it all screamed danger. So, on the second day, I did something no one in the room expected. I spoke. "Dad, I think this plan is too risky," I said, standing, voice tight but clear. "If the market shifts and it will, we're exposed. We could lose everything. Why not invest in updating the Oregon and Montana plants instead?" Silence. Not the respectful kind, the cold, cutting kind. Then came the scoff. Logan, my cousin, leaned back in his chair with that smug grin he always wears. "Josh, Cameron, you still playing with that green food app thing?" I felt my face flush. Then Melissa, my aunt, CFO of Beckett, tatted her sting. "What voting share do you even have?" 2%. 3. This isn't Shark Tank. Sit down. But I didn't. I stood straighter. Locked eyes with my father. "I've done the research," I told him. "This is dangerous. Please, just look at the data." He didn't even blink. "Josh," he said, voice low but lethal, "you're wasting everyone's time. You don't have the authority to speak here." I opened my mouth, heart pounding, desperate to reason with him. He cut me off. "Enough," he shouted, slamming the table. "Get out. You don't belong here." I stood frozen. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stood there, heart racing, hands cold. I looked around, scanning for one friendly face. One person to back me up. Nothing, just tight jaws and narrowed eyes. I wasn't a son. I wasn't a partner. I wasn't even a human being to them in that moment. I was an outsider. And if you've ever been pushed out by your own blood, you know exactly how that feels. Tell me in the comments, have you ever tried to speak the truth in a room that refused to hear you? What did you do? Was it worth it? Or did it leave a scar, like mine still does? Let's talk. Have you ever been in a room full of people who once called you family, people who raised you, shared holidays and birthdays, and realized, in one agonizing moment, that not one of them sees you anymore? That's what happened to me in that cold boardroom 3 years ago. The only person who used to have my back, Uncle Larry, just lowered his eyes. Didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there like he was watching a funeral, and maybe, in a way, he was watching the death of what little dignity I had left in that family. I walked out without saying a word, not out of grace, out of pure rage. I got in my car and drove through the night, back to Atlanta, white-knuckling the steering wheel the whole way. I swore to myself I'd never show up at another family conference again. But time has a funny way of circling back. A year later, I heard through an old colleague that Fairview Timber, the family's pride and joy, had hemorrhaged millions on a botched investment deal in Chile. Political chaos stalled the operations. The factory shut down. They had to sell 3 warehouses to cover their debt. Nobody called me. Nobody said, "Hey, turns out you had a point." Not even a lousy text. At the next meeting, my father just leaned back in his chair, exhaled, and said, "Every mistake is a chance to grow." Then moved on to the next slide, like nothing happened. Like it didn't matter that they'd crushed my proposal a year earlier. Like I was still the kid at the bottom of the pecking order. But I remembered. That burned the one from being dismissed. Laughed at, erased it, stayed with me. Still does. Every time I walk into that sterile conference room with its too polished wood and fake smiles. The air feels heavier. This morning, it hit harder than usual. My father was up front, outlining his shiny new idea to turn our family's ancestral estate into some high-end golf resort. The same house where my grandfather built everything from scratch, with his own 2 hands. This could be the turning point, Dad declared. "We need to take a preliminary vote today. Who's in favor of selling the estate?" Without hesitation, Jake raised his hand, so did Sophia, Uncle Darren, a few more. Uncle Larry sat still, expression unreadable, hands flat on the table. I didn't raise mine. Not that it mattered. I owned 3% of the voting shares. In that room, I might as well be the intern bringing coffee. "Opposed again, huh, Connor?" my father asked, voice as cold as ice water. "Care to explain Or are you here to waste our time? Like always, I met his eyes. I kept my voice steady. Dad, that house isn't just some asset, it's the heart of this family. We sell that, we're not just trading wood and stone, we're giving up who we are. Jake let out a theatrical laugh. Oh please, Connor. Spare us the sentiment. You still clinging to those bedtime stories about Grandpa? Do you even know how much revenue this resort could bring in? Jake, I replied, calm but unshaken. Not everything worth keeping shows up on a balance sheet. Grandpa built that home so we'd have a place to return to, not a vacation package for strangers. Before I could finish, Dad slammed his palm on the table. That's enough. You're not in charge here. If you can't contribute, stay quiet and let the grown-ups work. It hit like a slap. I wanted to stand up and yell. I wanted to rip off the mask and tell them the truth, that I'm worth $95 million now, that I built something real, that I could buy this entire company out if I wanted to, but not yet, because I have a plan, and it's going to unfold in my time, not theirs. I glanced at Uncle Larry. He gave me the slightest nod, like he knew, like he was silently saying, just wait. Your moment's coming. After the meeting, I stepped outside into the garden, trying to breathe, to calm the storm in my chest. I found a spot under the old oak Grandpa planted in the 60s. It was quiet there, honest. Uncle Larry followed and sat next to me. You good? He asked. I nodded, though it was more exhaustion than confidence. I'm tired, Uncle. Tired of being the joke. Tired of feeling like I'm 12 again, like I don't belong in there. He looked straight ahead, his voice low. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone in that room. But when the time comes, show them who you really are. Let me ask you something. If your own family overlooked you, dismissed you, mocked your voice, would you stay silent? Or would you wait, quietly, for the perfect moment to change everything? Drop a comment below. Tell me, what would you do in my shoes? Because my story's not over, and neither is yours. Have you ever sat silently in a room full of people who once dismissed you, knowing tomorrow everything changes? Uncle Ray leaned in, his voice low and calm, his hand resting firmly on my shoulder. Stay patient, son. Wait for the right moment. Do you already have a plan? I looked at him, uncertain. But something in his eyes, steady, unwavering, gave me the push I needed. I do, I whispered. I've got $95 million in assets. My startup, it took off. Bigger than anyone knows. Tomorrow morning, I'm going public, and I'll block the sale of Granddad's house. Ray's face lit up. Then he let out the kind of laugh you only hear from someone who's been holding on to hope for way too long. Well, I'll be damned, he said, shaking his head. You really are John Merrick's grandson. Your old man's not gonna know what hit him. We sat there, just the two of us, surrounded by the fading scent of cedar and old books. We talked about Grandpa, his stubborn honesty, his late-night lessons, his belief that integrity always outweighed money. Somewhere between the quiet and the laughter, I felt lighter. Like I had finally stepped out of a shadow I didn't know I'd been living in. Tomorrow, it all comes to a head. The family meeting. My father, myself. I'm not just showing up, I'm taking back my voice. I'm defending the legacy of the only man in this bloodline who ever saw me for who I really was. Later that night, I lay on the narrow bed in my old room, the same room I used to hide in as a teenager. The moonlight trickled in through the curtains, casting pale streaks over the battered desk. My briefcase sat there, zipped, heavy with truth. The sound of crickets outside was almost soothing. Almost I didn't sleep. My heart was thumping, not from fear, but from a fire I'd been carrying quietly for far too long. Years of being the punchline, the failure, the boy with potential no one bothered to believe in. That ends tomorrow. I'm ready. Karen, my attorney, had sent me the email late last night. All the documentation was attached, verified assets totaling $95 million. The sustainable food startup I built from a garage in Austin, the one no one in my family ever asked about, the one I bled for, my voting power now 41%. Enough to shut down any plan my father Gregory Merrick tries to push. He always thought he controlled everything. The family trust, the estate, even my mother's funeral, but not this. Not anymore. I thought of Mum. How she used to tell me, don't raise your voice, raise your value. She's been gone 3 years now, and yet tonight, she feels closer than ever. She'd be proud, I think, actually. No, I know she would. And you? Have you ever kept something hidden, something powerful waiting for just the right time to show the world who you are? Tell me below. What would you do if you finally held the power everyone said you'd never have? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tomorrow, I show them who I've become. Don't miss what happens next. ChatGPT Noi. Have you ever held on to someone's words so tightly, they became your armor years later? That's how it is with me. My mum passed from cancer when I was just starting out, and the silence she left behind, it still echoes. But before she left, she said something that stuck with me, like breath on a cold window. She held my hand one night, as I was drowning in debt and doubt with my startup, and whispered, Noah, you are my light. Don't ever let anyone dim that. I didn't get it then. But now, her voice is the engine behind every decision I make. And it's not just her. Uncle Walt quiet, stubborn Walter's the only one in this family who sees me for who I really am. Last night, under the creaking oak in the backyard, we sat together like we used to when I was a kid. He leaned in close and told me how Grandpa was laughed at by his own brothers. Called him a fool for thinking he could turn 10 acres of dust into a business empire. Walt smiled and said, You're more like him than you know. That hit different. It made me realize I'm not just fighting to keep the family estate. I'm fighting to keep alive the fire Grandpa started with his bare hands. Now, I can already picture tomorrow's showdown at the dining room table. My dad, Charles, always so calculated, will try to push the final vote. He'll make it look like just another business deal. My cousin Derek will do that smug head tilt thing, and Olivia sharp-tongued, as ever will throw in a jab wrapped in a joke. But I won't flinch this time. I won't let them dismiss me again. I'll rise.com and ready, pop open my briefcase, and lay down what I've built. They don't know what's coming. Not really. When morning breaks on the third day, the old mansion feels thick with tension. Like something's about to snap. I wake up before the sun fully rises, throw on a light blue button-down and clean jeans. Not to impress, just to feel grounded. As I walk through the halls, I realize I'm not the scared teenager who once got kicked out of this very room. And I'm not the fresh-faced 30-year-old they laughed at for pitching stupid ideas. I'm Noah Grayson now, 35 head of a company valued at $95 million. And I'm walking into this room, not just with documents, but with purpose. In the kitchen, Uncle Walt is already up, nursing a cup of black coffee. He pours one for me, without asking, like always. His eyes meet mine, steady and proud. Today's your day, Noah, he says in that gravelo voice of his. Do it how your granddad would have done it. And I will. But let me ask you, what would you do if your whole family stood between you and the legacy you believe in? Would you stay quiet or speak up? Let me know in the comments. I read every word. Have you ever held something so tightly that your knuckles went white, not out of fear, but conviction? That's exactly where I was that morning. Fingers locked around my coffee mug. Heart pounding like I was heading into a courtroom. Or a battlefield. I won't let Grandpa down. Not you, and not Uncle Joe either. I told my uncle, looking him dead in the eye. He clapped my shoulder and grinned. That kind of grin only people who've been knocked down and stood back up can pull off. I'm backing you. I've got my 10%. With your 41%, we've got a real shot. Let's make some damn history. I laughed. Not one of those polite chuckles you toss around at brunch. A real, honest-God laugh. The first since this whole family circus began. In that moment, I didn't feel like I was standing alone anymore. We had breakfast in silence, but it wasn't awkward. It felt focused, like soldiers eating before the storm. My mind kept going over the documents again and again. Valuation, papers, signed investment contracts, the attorney's certification, all neatly packed in my briefcase. All ready, I held onto that case like it was armor. When we stepped into the boardroom, the air was heavy. You could feel the tension clinging to the walls. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table, a glossy folder of resort development plans laid out in front of him like trophies. Beside him was my cousin Tyler, leaning toward his sister-in-law Jenna, whispering something that made them both laugh under their breath. They weren't taking any of this seriously. Across the table sat Uncle Joe, Aunt Claire, and the rest of the board members, some related by blood, others just tied to this family business by decades of shared profit and silence. I sat down with the briefcase still on my lap. Not just to keep it close, but because its weight reminded me what this was all for. Years of being dismissed, overlooked. All of it came down to this. My father tapped the table gently, commanding the room like he always did. Today marks the end of our shareholders' conference, he said. His voice, still sharp, still authoritative. We're voting on the sale of the family estate to Lakeside Properties. This deal is the key to modernizing our holdings. It's time we stop clinging to the past. He looked around. Anyone wish to speak before we proceed? Uncle Joe gave me the slightest nod. That was my cue. I stood slowly, my hand gripping the handle of the briefcase. Not out of nerves, but because every part of me was about to push back on a lifetime of being quiet. I do, I said. My voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. It landed. The whole table turned toward me. Tyler rolled his eyes and muttered something. Jenna stifled a laugh over. But I didn't look at them. I looked at my father. Dad, I continued, I know you believe selling the house is the best path forward. But I disagree. I've spent the last 3 years preparing a proposal, and I have the full financials to prove there's another way. Pause. Let that sink in. You told us to respect the family legacy, but the truth is you've tried to erase parts of it. Grandpa built that estate. He didn't just pass down property, he passed down purpose. The room was quiet. Jenna leaned back. Tyler's smirk faded. I set the briefcase on the table and opened it with a satisfying click. I pulled out the documents, one by one, laying them flat. Valuation reports, sustainability assessments, new investor commitments, and most importantly, notarized letter confirming my majority voting rights had just been transferred. For the record, I said, sliding the letter forward, with the proxy votes from Uncle Joe and Claire and the McCarty Trust, I now represent 51% of voting shares. Silence. Then a sharp breath from my father. You went behind my back. No, I said plainly. I finally stood up. He didn't yell, didn't slam his hand, but I could see it in his eyes. The first crack in the mirror, Tyler pushed. His chair back, clearly rattled. This is outrageous. What's outrageous, I replied, is trying to sell off the only piece of this family with real soul left in it. Just to build another hotel. Pause again. Let them sit in it. If anyone else at this table thinks we should destroy Grandpa's home to pave a parking lot, speak now. Nobody did, not even my father. So I turned to the room and asked the question that still hangs with me. Today, what's a legacy worth if all we do is sell it off for cash? And I want to ask you, reading this, what would you have done? Would you stay quiet, or would you fight for what really matters? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. Have you ever walked into a room where every face already decided who you are, where, no matter what you've achieved, you're still just the failure they left behind? That was me, standing there in that conference room, back in Chicago. Sunlight slanted across the long table, illuminating the polished wood and the smug faces of my family. And I mean family, by blood, not by loyalty. Here we go again, my cousin Jake muttered, leaning back like he was ready to be entertained. You gonna tell us about your failed startup, or what? Sophia, my sister-in-law, giggled, covering her lips with a diamond-encrusted hand like she was still playing debutante. Let him speak, Jake, she said, but there was no warmth in it. Then my father crossed his arms, cold, dismissive. Nathan, if you're about to spin that tired speech about legacy and values, don't bother. We don't have time. I didn't sit. I didn't flinch. I looked right at him, straight into the same eyes that used to look past me my whole life. And I felt everything, the rejection. The 10 years of grinding through doubt and disappointment. The nights I cried in silence while they raised champagne to my brother's IPOs, but my voice, it was steady. I'm not here to talk about legacy or values, Dad. I'm here to talk about the truth, and I brought proof. I clicked open the briefcase. The sound echoed louder than I expected. The room hushed. Even Jake stopped smirking. Laid out the documents crisp, signed, sealed, and slid them to the center of the table. Everyone stared as if I'd placed a ticking bomb. This, I said clearly, is the valuation report for my company. The sustainable food startup you all mocked, remember? The one you said would never make it past beta testing. I took a breath and I swear it was like the walls leaned in. It's currently valued at $250 million. My personal assets, me. The joke of this family, stand at $95 million. And by the rules of this conference, I looked at every single one of them. That gives me 41% voting power. That number hit the room like a bullet. Jake's jaw actually dropped. Sophia blinked like she'd been slapped with cold water. Uncle Marcus squinted, leaned forward, trying to make sense of the report, like maybe the ink was playing tricks. And my father, for the first time in my entire life, he looked shaken. Not angry, not disappointed, but genuinely, deeply unprepared. What are you saying? He asked, voice lower than before. Nate, what is this? I didn't blink. I just pushed the papers toward him. You can verify everything, it's all legit. Independent auditing firm, verified investment contracts from major firms in Palo Alto, and a confirmation letter from my attorney. I paused, let it breathe. This isn't smoke and mirrors. This isn't a pitch. I don't own 3% like you all thought. I looked at each of them again, slowly. I own 41%. The ripple was audible. Chairs shifted. Papers rustled. Breaths held. Jake stuttered. No way. You're bluffing. Someone like you, how could you possibly have $95 million? Someone like me, I repeated. You mean someone who didn't grow up with a private driver? Someone who doesn't wear $1,000 suits to feel worthy? I took a step closer to the table. My voice dropped, but every word hit like a gavel. Someone like me worked 18-hour days, slept on the floor of a warehouse, got laughed out of pitch meetings, and still came back the next morning. Someone like me believed in something you all couldn't even see, feeding the world sustainably, ethically, for real. I let the silence linger. And then I asked them what they'd never ask me. So tell me, what have you built that will outlast your yachts and weekend homes? Now if you've ever been underestimated, written off, or talked over, drop a comment below. Have you ever been the someone like you in the room? Because sometimes, the quiet ones don't come back to beg. They come back to lead. Have you ever stood in a room full of people who spent years underestimating you only to finally hold the truth in your hands? What would you say? Would you even need to say anything? Glanced down at the financial reports, my name printed clearly on every legal page. Then I looked upright into the eyes of the man who raised me. My father, Richard Wallace, still gripping the papers like they might vanish if he blinked too long. His jaw was clenched, his eyes unreadable. Dad, I said, steady but firm. I didn't stay quiet all these years because I didn't care. I stayed quiet because I was working, watching, learning, and now I'm ready to speak for all of us. Before he could react, my Uncle Robert's older brother, David, stood up from his chair. No hesitation. His voice cut through the silence like a gavel. I'm with Noah. His words didn't just echo in the room, they shattered it. I control 10% of this company's voting shares. He continued. And if my nephew holds 41%, that gives us majority control. That means this proposal ends, right here. Instant panic. My cousin Madison shouted, Uncle David, are you out of your mind? This is a $90 million deal. For what, some stubborn fantasy of loyalty? My brother Chase slammed his hand on the oak table, shaking the crystal water glasses. You've got to be kidding. Noah, you think you can just stroll in here, throw some paperwork on the table, and play king? I didn't flinch. I'd played this moment out in my head 100 times. Dad raised a hand. The room fell quiet again. He turned to me, slowly. That look half challenge, half something else. Not anger, not disappointment. Something heavier, resignation. You think money makes you ready? He asked. You think signing a few documents means you understand how this family works? I smiled, not out of arrogance, but because I'd finally earned this. No, Dad. I understand how Grandpa wanted this family to work. Not built on backroom deals and silenced votes, but on unity, integrity. We weren't supposed to become this. Then I set the final page down. I'm vetoing the sale of the Glenhurst estate. At first, murmurs, then yelling. Chase nearly knocked over his chair. You can't just, Dad, say something. I turned toward my father again. His eyes didn't leave the page, not this time. He knew what was printed there. The proof of my legal standing. The proof he never thought I'd have the guts to use. He looked up, finally. Noah, he said, voice quieter now. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? I didn't look away. Absolutely. That house isn't just land. It's our history, and I'm not letting you turn it into condos. There was a pause. Then Uncle David clapped. One slow clap, then another. Well done, son, he said. About damn time someone in this family remembered what we stand for. The room broke apart. Madison stormed off, hurling accusations under her breath. Chase sat stiff, staring at me like I'd betrayed him personally. Around the table, whispers bloomed. Aunt Melanie, Cousin Eric, even Grandma Judith, murmuring between one another like witnesses to a revolution. But my father, he didn't yell, he didn't argue. He just sat down, still holding those pages. His shoulders dropped in a way I'd never seen before. That's when I realized, he wasn't just angry, he was tired. The fight was over, and I'd finally won, not just the vote, but the right to be heard. Have you ever stood up to people who made you feel small your entire life and walked away knowing you finally won? That's exactly what I felt as I stepped out of that conference room and into the garden. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. For the first time in 10 years, it was the beat of something new, freedom. Uncle Rob pulled me into a hug, holding on longer than usual. You did it, Corey, he whispered. His voice cracked just a bit, and I could see it in his eyes, the pride, the relief. Your grandfather's smiling somewhere. I let out a quiet laugh, not loud or showy, just real. Like I'd been carrying a weight so long, I'd forgotten what lightness felt like. My father, Jack, and the rest of the family weren't going to back down easy. They'd come back swinging. But for once, I wasn't afraid. I had Uncle Rob. I had the inheritance my grandfather quietly secured for me. And most of all, I had something they never could take: my conviction. Back in my room, I checked my email. A message from my attorney. Waited there, short and clear. All the documents had been notarized. The protections were airtight. I stared at the garden outside my window, tall oaks swaying in the wind, planted by Grandpa's own hands decades ago. Thank you, Grandpa, I whispered. I did it. I placed my hand on my chest. The rhythm there wasn't panic anymore. It was something else, something calmer. The feeling of walking through hell and finally coming out on the other side. I did what I thought I could never do. I confronted my father, Jack Douglas, to his face. I said no, and I meant it. But let's be honest, this wasn't a fairy tale ending. As the moonlight spilled across my floor, I knew this victory was only the beginning. My family wasn't built for forgiveness. The Douglas name doesn't bend, it breaks, and usually with fire. And now, I had lit the match. A knock interrupted the storm in my mind. It was Uncle Rob again, still in that old white button-down he wore to every family meeting. He stepped inside, his smile soft, his shoulders relaxed. You good, Corey? I don't know, I admitted. I think I just blew up the family. He chuckled as he sat down in the old wooden chair by the window. They needed shaking up, he said, staring into the dark garden. Your dad and Jack will be mad, sure. But they can't bury the truth forever. You didn't just speak up, Corey. You showed them you're not just some kid. You carry your grandfather's backbone. That hit me hard, because deep down, that's all I ever wanted, for someone to say I belonged, not because I obeyed, but because I stood firm. But with every moment of clarity came a new kind of fear. I hadn't just rejected a real estate deal. I'd stood against the system my father spent 20 years building. That kind of rebellion doesn't go unanswered. The next morning, the tension hung in the air like a fog. The mansion felt colder somehow, heavier. I walked into the dining room expecting the usual laughter, silverware clinking against plates, maybe a snide remark from Jack. But instead, silence. Sophia sat at the end of the long mahogany table, scrolling through her phone. Her eyes flicked toward me for a second, sharp, unreadable. The kind of look that says, "You've changed everything, and I haven't decided if I hate you for it yet." I nodded at her, but she said nothing. Now, I've got a question for you. What would you do if you finally stood up to your family, but you knew it was just round one? Drop a comment below. I want to hear your stories. Have you ever had to choose truth over comfort? Blood ties over personal peace? Because for me, this isn't the end, it's the opening bell. That was me, standing in the doorway of my father's dining room, the morning light slicing through the curtains like a quiet threat. My Uncle Martin and Aunt Linda paused mid-whisper. Their lips tightened the second they saw me. My cousin Jason was nowhere in sight, probably off licking the wounds of yesterday's surprise. And at the head of the table, as always, sat my father, coffee in hand, stiff, silent, stone. "Take a seat, Ryan," he said flatly. Not a hint of warmth, just protocol. I pulled out the nearest chair, the scraping sound sharp in the silence. It felt like I was the final act in a courtroom drama. No one said it, but they all expected me to explain myself. I didn't. I wanted to see what my father would do first. After a pause so long, it hummed. He finally broke it. "Well," he said, his voice neutral, but every word dipped in resentment. "You certainly made a spectacle of yourself yesterday. 95 million. 41% voting power. That's not something you just stumble into, Ryan. You've been keeping this family in the dark for years." I couldn't tell if I was supposed to feel shame or pride. Maybe both. I met his stare head-on. "Dad, I wasn't hiding anything. I've been building just like Grandpa did. I'm not here to flaunt anything. I'm here to protect what actually matters." He scoffed, a short, bitter laugh. "Protect? Protect what? Your grandfather's legacy? Or are you just trying to make me look like a fool?" His words stung, but I didn't flinch. Not anymore. "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said, steady. "I just want to do what's right. This house, this land, it wasn't meant to be sold. Grandpa built it so we'd have a place to belong, not a piece of real estate to fight over." Just then, Jason stormed in. Bright blue polo shirt, still creased like it had come straight from a country club catalog. But his face flushed, furious. "You think you've won, don't you?" he spat. "You think you can walk in here, flash a few documents, and suddenly you're in charge. You're nothing but a pretender." "Jason," Uncle Martin cut in sharply from the corner. "Enough." Ryan did what none of us had the guts to do. He stood for what's right. "If you've got a problem, maybe start by looking in the mirror." Jason turned to fire back, but Dad raised a hand. Just a gesture, enough to shut everyone down. "Jason, sit," he said coldly. Then to me, "I'm not going to drag this out any longer. You've got 41%. With Martin's support, that gives you the majority. You won the vote. But don't think this is over." I nodded slowly. "I understand, Dad, but I'm not stepping back either." Would you have stood your ground, or walked away when your whole family turned against you? Comment below, what would you have done? Later that afternoon, I found myself standing by the old oak trees in the backyard, the ones Grandpa had planted when I was barely tall enough to climb the fence. I didn't hear him coming, but when my father appeared beside me, I knew this moment would be different. No suit, No tie, just a plain shirt and khakis. The uniform of someone who'd dropped his armor, even if just for now. Ryan, he said quietly, you know why I wanted to sell this place? I turned toward him, not sure what to expect. Money? I asked, not even trying to hide the edge in my voice. He shook his head. Not just money. I wanted this family to move forward. I thought if we let go of this place, maybe we'd stop holding on to the past so tightly. There it was. Not bitterness. Not a power play. Just fatigue. And maybe a bit of regret. I didn't respond right away. I looked up at the trees. They'd grown tall, just like me. Just like the silence that had lived in this family too long. Sometimes the hardest battles aren't over property or power. They're about trying to be seen. Me finally, truly seen by the people who were supposed to know you best. Let me ask you, have you ever had to fight for something that was supposed to be yours all along? Tell me below, I'm listening. We were standing out back near the sycamore trees when my father, Gregory Holden, turned to me with that familiar gleam in his eye. The one that always said bigger, better, more. To make the Holden name known not just here in North Carolina, but across the country. That was always the plan, he said, arms crossed. My father, your grandfather, he built something solid, but he stayed small, comfortable. I never wanted that for us. I stayed quiet, letting the words hang in the evening air. This was the first time he'd mentioned Grandpa Joe without his usual smugness, and for a second, I wondered if he was trying to be sincere, but something about the way he framed it, like legacy was just a ladder to climb, rubbed me wrong. Dad, I said slowly, moving forward doesn't mean abandoning where we come from. Grandpa didn't care about being a big name. He wanted us to stay connected, to be a family, not a corporation. He looked at me, and for the briefest moment, his confidence faltered. Then came something I didn't see coming. Michael, he said, soft but firm, I want you to work with me. You've got ideas, resources, drive. Together, we could take Holden Timber to a level no one imagined. I'll carve out a place for you at the top. I'll admit it, part of me flinched. Not out of fear, but out of that old hidden hope, that maybe, just maybe, this was his way of saying, I see you now. That he finally recognized what I'd built on my own. But another part of me, the one that remembered being told I was a dreamer, that I'd never last in tech, that I wasn't cut out for business, that part knew better. I appreciate the offer, Dad, I said carefully, but I'm building something of my own, and I'm going to keep going. My way. He pressed his lips together, hard. Didn't say a word. Then he turned and walked off, his figure disappearing into the trees like smoke. I felt lighter, and yet strangely heavy. I wasn't done though, that evening, as I packed up to head back to Atlanta. Someone knocked at my door. It was my brother, Ryan. Same smirk, same cool stare. Michael, he said, with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, congrats. Who'd have guessed my baby brother would turn out to be a millionaire? I didn't answer right away, just gave him a neutral nod. Thanks, Ryan. Something on your mind? He walked in like he owned the place, sat on the armchair like he'd done it 100 times. Look, I don't want us to be at odds, he said. We're family, right? Maybe I gave you hell growing up, but now that you've made it, maybe we team up. I've got ideas. You've got cash. I cut him off before he could get comfortable. If we ever work together, I said evenly, it won't be because I have money. You never asked about what I do, what I'm building, or why. I live the way I do. Don't act like it matters now. He straightened, his smile evaporating. You're still holding on to all that, he muttered, eyes narrowing. Fine, Michael. But don't think you're better than us just because, and that's when. I shut the door in my mind. Transition to viewer engagement. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you trust the sudden kindness, or see through it? Drop a comment below. Have you ever had someone try to reconnect only after your success? Have you ever looked at someone you love, really looked and realized they'll never see you the way you see them? That's what hit me, as Tyler stood up from the leather chair in my father's study. His jaw tight, his words sharper than they needed to be. Dad's not done, he'll find a way back, and I'll be right there with him. Then he walked out. No goodbye, no glance back, just gone. I sat there for a second, feeling that same old punch in the gut. I'd been stupid enough to hope he'd finally see me as his brother, not some roadblock. But with Tyler, that hope was always short-lived. In the middle of all this, the tension with my father. The silent war with Tyler. Uncle Dean was the only steady presence. The only one who didn't treat me like a threat. After Tyler stormed off, Dean found me outside on the back deck, where I was staring at the line of pine trees behind the house, trying to breathe. "You did something powerful today, Mason," he said, his voice low and proud. "I know what it feels like to be left out, ignored. I spent my whole life under your dad's shadow. But today, today you gave me a reason to believe this family still has a shot." That landed hard. His words meant something, more than I could explain. I turned to him. "I couldn't have done any of it without you," I said honestly. He shook his head. "No, Mason. You stepped up. I was just there to back you, but I believe in you. I believe that with you, this family can finally remember who we were supposed to be, the values your granddad built everything on." We sat there a long time, talking about Grandpa, about what kind of man he really was, before all the power plays and property fights. Dean shared stories I'd never heard. How Grandpa used to fund trade school tuition for kids from town. How he helped rebuild the local youth center after a fire. "That's who he was," Dean said. "That's the legacy. And you, Mason, you're walking in those footsteps." The weight of it all settled on me, but not in a crushing way. It felt more like a responsibility I was finally ready for. When the board meeting wrapped and people began leaving the estate, I walked out, with mixed emotions. Sure, I'd won the vote. I had the keys to the house now, and the future of our family company in my hands. But victory didn't feel like peace. My father still viewed me like a rival. Tyler, he wasn't finished scheming, he never was, and the others, Sophia, Marissa, even Aunt Gwen, they still watched me like I was holding something they wanted back. But for the first time, I didn't feel small. I wasn't chasing approval anymore. I had proven something to them, yes, but mostly to myself. As I reached the gravel lot behind the house, Dean followed me to my truck. The same old Dodge I drove in high school, still dusty, still mine. "What's your next move?" he asked. I turned and looked back at the house. No, not just a house. The land, the trees, the bones of something good that used to stand here. "I want to make this place mean something again," I said. "Not just some estate with marble floors and oil paintings. I want it to be a place that gives back. A place that lifts up kids who never thought they had a shot like I once felt." Dean smiled, eyes glassy. "Then count me in, Mason. I'm with you, always." I climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key, and let the engine rumble to life. The wind moved the branches of the pines as I looked back one last time. I'd kept the house, but I knew the real work, the soul work, was just beginning. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the long road ahead.